Alrighty, welcome everyone, and welcome to our transition to organic training. We are so happy that you're here and that we have this opportunity to connect with you all. My name is Elise Landres Nowack, and I'm one of the organic specialists on the East Coast, and I will be moderating today's session. But yeah, our first presenter today will be Colene Reed. She is an East Region Organic Specialist, and she works under a partnership agreement with Oregon Till. So her previous work has included operating and managing farms for farm-based education organizations, doing organic inspections, and working with grass-based livestock farmers in the Northeast. She is also a longtime member and current president of the board of the Vermont Grass Farmers Association. We will be hearing from her first, and then our second presenter will be Lynne Haynor, who's an organic specialist for the Central Region. She works through a partnership agreement through the Organic Trade Association, or OTA, and her background includes working in organic inspection and certification, agriculture education, and working on farms. So she also holds a Master's of Science in Agroecology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and still calls Madison home. So thank you both so much for being here. And then if you'll go to that next slide, we will briefly go over our agenda. So we'll go ahead and start off with that organic review, just so everyone's on the same page there. We will then move into understanding and planning, CPA 138 and DIA 140. And then we will share some advice and experience from TSPs that we have spoken with. And then, yeah, we'll just finish up with some key takeaways, resources, and our Q&A part. Next slide, please. So just wanted to take a moment to note that this presentation is going to be more focused on the planning and implementation of CPA 138 and DIA 140. We previously did a webinar on how to become a TSP for those activities. So I'll put the link in the chat here in case you're interested in viewing that webinar. And if you have any questions about becoming a TSP for these practices, please reach out to your regional TSP coordinator for that process. And if you're unsure of who that might be, we'll be covering that a little bit later in the presentation. So we hope you all leave here with a better understanding of organic and how TSPs can help producers transitioning using CPA 138 and DIA 140. So with all that being said, I will turn it over to Colene. Thank you all so much.
All right. So like Elise said, my name's Colene. We're going to talk about the importance of organic transition. It's going to help us build that knowledge and understanding of the opportunity that Conservation Planning Activity 138 can provide to producers. Next slide. So why organic? Farmers may consider organic transition for a lot of reasons. They could be drawn to organic because of a commitment to sustainable agriculture. It could be part of their land stewardship plan. They could be looking for clean food for their family, for their community, or simply looking for that market access, the financial gains that come along with transitioning to organic. Next slide. So looking at the growth in organic sales, we can see it steadily increasing over the years. In 2023, the organic marketplace hit $69.7 billion in sales with a 3.4% growth. Younger generations are showing that they will be organic supporters into the future. According to the 2025 Organic Situation Report by the Economic Research Service, despite the increase in demand for organic products, there has been a decrease in certified and transitioning acres since 2022. So while there's this increased demand for sustainable and organic food systems, producers do need support to keep up that production. So this graphic here I have on the slide, I like it because it's very broad. It shows that increase in organic sales and even some projected increase. If you're interested in digging in the details more, the National Agricultural Agricultural Statistics Service, NASS, organic survey link. I've got a link for y'all. They have a national briefing that would go into more details there. So I'm going to put that in the Q&A. And next slide. So Oregon State University and Oregon Till conducted a national survey, and they asked producers what type of support they needed as they transitioned to organic. Mentoring from experienced organic farmers was the #1 identified need. It was followed by one-on-one technical assistance during transition. NRCS is well suited to support producers with technical assistance, and the TSP, the technical service provider role, is a great example of that one-on-one experience. Next slide. Know that if you're working with an organic producer, you may not be the only technical expertise on their bench of support. One example I like to use of another resource producers could be tapping into is the Transition to Organic Partnership Program. So a producer can be enrolled in NRCS programs, including conservation planning activities, and this USDA program without conflict. Every top region has these 4 categories: farmer mentorship, technical assistance, community building, and workforce development. This is how the Midwest tackles those key areas in detail. And you can see where it's highlighting that farmer mentorship that was identified in the in a previous study, but also that technical assistance that TSPs also provide through NRCS. Next slide. So know that if, so what kind of support are the producers looking for? A lot of categories in this report overlap with NRCS support of natural resource concerns. So they're not all food safety related or commingling of non-organic and organic things. They really do have a conservation base here if you take a look at this. So this is from the Organic Farming Research Foundation. They published their National Organic Research Agenda in 2022, and they asked what technical assistance needs producers have as they transition to organic. Organic weed, insect, pest, and disease management came in as the top response. Meeting organic requirements for biodiversity and resource conservation, integrating livestock, and soil conservation and soil health were all identified as a technical assistant need by over half of the respondents. So a lot of great overlap here. All right, next slide. So we have a lot of knowledgeable people in this group, I'm sure of it. We're going to do a 1-slide review of organic certification. So a producer who is looking to sell certified organic products, they're going to pick an organic certifier and they're going to begin their application. The certifiers are audited and credited by the USDA National Organic Program. Much like NRCS, they can make their own interpretations of the regulations and add restrictions or clarification or interpretations, but they have to meet the regulations at a minimum requirement, and they're audited at themselves at meeting those. The producer prepares an organic system plan. This is typically a form to fill out specific to that certifier. And then that organic system plan is verified during the first inspection. The inspector is verifying the information in the organic system plan is up to date. They're going to do this by touring the property. They're going to inspect all of the cleaning supplies, medical supplies for livestock, soil mixes when seeding in the greenhouse, what inoculants are going on those cover crop seeds, what cover crop seeds have been used already, what's in inventory, and how does that compare to the receipts of cover crop seeds purchased? It can be quite extensive. The inspector's also interviewing the farmer about the different systems and practices. So it's a lot about the inputs, about the materials being used, but it's also about practices. This occurs around 6 months before the first organic product is ready for market. Depending on the circumstances and crop, it could need to be a little earlier, or if it's a particular, they can only inspect when it's active. They can't inspect in theory of what's going to happen. So it can be close to when that crop's ready for market. If a prohibited substance had been applied to the land, there's a 3-year transition period. And a lot of you may be familiar with that 3-year transition period. The certification specialist at the organization, they then evaluate the organic system plan and that inspection report to confirm compliance with organic regulations, and they issue an organic certification by product. The producer and certifier will continue this annual cycle of submitting an OSP, inspection, and some unannounced inspections will get peppered in there as well. Next slide. So NRCS and TSPs can come together to support transitioning producers by working on conservation planning activities. Organic transition can be very complex, so the TSP ensures that the best practices are used to conserve benefits in soil, water, and biodiversity. Every farm and operation is unique, so they're able to create a customized solution to fit that exact conservation need of the land and the grower. While organic regulations and NRCS standards do align really well, we've seen that in a couple of these surveys, and the needs of transitioning organic farmers, the plans must meet NRCS standards, and a TSP can support the producer in navigating the NRCS process. Farmers may struggle with technical and regulatory barriers, and a TSP can help with that as well. So producers that utilize conservation planning activities, they could be experienced farmers who are transitioning from chemical use to an organic system. They could be expanding their organic projects on their farm. They could be a new beginning farmer, taking over a farm that's been fallow or digging into fresh land. All of these producers will benefit from that one-on-one technical support and planning. All right, next slide. So now I'm going to do a 3,000 mile up view of CPA 138 and DIA 140. If those acronyms feel confusing to you, give me just 2 minutes. We're going to say them all in full and start to build our understanding of these two practice planning activities. Next slide. Okay. Conservation planning activities, they are activities where a customer will take funding obligated through a contract to select and hire a technical service provider to complete a conservation plan. So you can see listed here, there's more than just the 138 on the slide here. And this is not a complete list of CPAs offered currently, but you can see the 138 is highlighted. The final product is a summary document with an emphasis on conservation and soil health. A CPA requires at least one resource concern to be addressed within a reasonable time frame and should include one conservation practice standard to implement. Now, if you've worked on CAP 138 and only CAP 138, the change to CPA 138 in recent years might have been a big shift, as CPA 138 was adjusted to become more like these other CPAs offered and follow the NOP sample template a little bit less. And Lynne's going to dig into the details of exactly or details of how that looks, but I did want to mention that kind of shift from CAP 138 to CPA 138. Next slide. CPA 138 is specific to organic production and producers seeking to transition their farm to National Organic Program, that NOP compliance, and get certified organic. It's an opportunity for a technical service provider who is knowledgeable in organic systems to help the producer think through how they might change, let's say, their nutrient management plan, their pest management strategies, and how to address any resource concerns that need to be resolved. Any resource concerns that could potentially arise as they make the transition to organic. I do want to note for CPA 138, TSPs do not have to be certified in all of the practices that they include in the plan. Next slide. So while the CAP program, like CAP 138, would include job sheets, the CPA does not include IRs, job sheets, or other conservation planning standard details for implementation. If some of the details were worked out during the CPA process to help the producer make a decision and create that plan with the TSP, they can be added in as resources and referenced during the design and implementation portion of moving through this process. But full filled out IRs are not deliverable for the CPA. That has been put in this design and implementation activities. They're the conservation planning process step 8. That's what they represent. And they're done, and they provide, the DIAs provide funding for the design needs of the project, and they provide one-on-one support when the producer is navigating the planning process, making sure they meet those NRCS requirements, state regulations, things like that. All right, next slide. So design and implementation activity 140, it's a plan that describes how to implement long-term goals through practices that direct farm development to provide for intended future uses. They include deliverables like implementation requirement documents, those IRs. It might have permits, state regulations, and the producer's particular needs of implementation designs and their decision-making recorded as well. So TSPs must be certified in the conservation practice standards that they're designing for this. And it may all come together by utilizing some subcontractors if necessary. But if the TSP is not certified in a practice that's in the CPA, it can't be included in the DIA. So this may influence whether a producer wants to move on to the DIA portion of the planning process, or if they want to work directly, or if NRCS, has the capacity, they want to work with NRCS directly to get their conservation practice standards contracted, may be influenced a bit by what conservation practice standards are included in the CPA and whether the TSP can plan the implementation phase of them all. It's important to note this is specifically in the organic area. TSPs cannot be certified for interim practices, and since we have the interim conservation practice standard 823 organic management, that's why that's a particular note for organics. All right, next slide. So CPA 138 and DIA 140, they're going to support that organic transition with the producer. It provides a whole farm conservation plan tailored to meet organic certification requirements. It's that comprehensive planning. Both activities identify resource concerns and guide the implementation of practices to address them. DI 140 itself offers site-specific designs and implementation plans for structural management practices, or let's say sourcing materials for management practices, things like that. It ensures alignment with USDA organic certification standards for natural resources, and it promotes soil health, water quality, and biodiversity through long-term conservation efforts. All right, next slide. We have found that there's some common challenges, and the ones we hear about are listed here on this slide. States and TSPs can sometimes be unclear on what the deliverables are and exactly what those might look like. An example of that might be plans that are very long, and so they can be difficult to review by the farmer and NRCS staff. We've heard that there can be an underemphasis on the assessment tools and resource concerns in the plans. And depending on the producer's transition timeline, sometimes the funding cycles and the NRCS process can't fit very well with these CPAs. So that's something that we've heard about this, like a not good fit sometimes. And then that piece I mentioned when we were talking about DIA 140s, that utilization of interim conservation practices, like that organic management. Right, next slide. So the common work that everyone is doing together is to get that producer through the 9 steps of the conservation planning process. So there's many different ways to do this. And this graphic here is to show the different ways it can flow between NRCS staff and TSPs. Keeping in mind that the TSP process is still very much linked to NRCS as well. There's times when TSPs need to meet with NRCS and the producer and get sign-offs, approvals, things like that. So unlike CAP, which took all of the steps 1 through 9 into the planning activity, the CPA, DIA, and CMAs have the flexibility to stand alone if a producer prefers. It also allows for TSPs to plan a CPA and then maybe NRCS staff build out those conservation practice standards in another contract. And CMAs can be utilized at any stage of the process. Now, if we're going to add organic management, ICPS 823 to this graphic, it could be one of these practices here, a conservation practice standard that is in maybe with another conservation practice standard. It was outlined in the CPA, and now NRCS is gonna work on those CPSs with the producer. Or if a producer does not need the full conservation planning activity as a one-on-one support with that technical service provider, and NRCS does have capacity for an RMS plan at that time, 823 could be a good option right from the start. So it's a complicated enough graphic as it stands, but to add 823 in there would be even more. But no, it could be a CPS in here, or it could just be 823 from the start, depending on the situation. All right, next slide. So we looked at who could possibly do the planning in that last graphic. Now we're going to take a look at the contracting aspects to consider. This is a commonly used graphic for CPA's conservation planning activities in general. The second option in the pairing options, so third row down, is the most commonly used option that we hear about. We have received feedback that pairing the CPA 138 and DIA 140 in the same contract, so second line down, can pose some problems and create some confusion. So the payment scenarios for DIA are based on the number of practices to be contracted. And without engaging the CPA process, it can be difficult to determine which DIA payment scenario is the best fit for that contract. But if you can talk with the producer, NRCS staff, and everyone finds a good fit and a utilization for the sequent option, it's definitely an option. The option that isn't really on the table, that can't be in the same contract, is the CPA, the DIA, and the conservation practices. They cannot all be done in the same contract. This graphic also doesn't show all of the possibilities we explored on the last slide, where after a CPA, the next step could be NRCS staff planning it, or the other way around. But I have cut them as two separate graphics for you all to try to make all of the arrows work and give us some good concepts to ground us in the two kind of different aspects. So there's the contracting portion of it, and then like who's going to do the work and how does it flow through that. All right. That's all I have for you all today. Lynne is going to dig into details and hopefully start helping you build an understanding of how the details work within these two practices and fill in any gaps here. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Colene. That's some great foundational information. Yeah, I'm going to be talking a little bit more in detail about planning CPA 138 and DIA 140. And I'm going to try to make this accessible to folks of all levels. We are also going to be sharing a resource document with all the links that are provided in this presentation and welcoming questions at the end. These slides will also be provided. So just a reminder of that. So Colene went over the definition, purpose, key components of CPA 138 and DIA 140 and introduced some common challenges. And we're going to turn our attention to the specifics of what's going to be included in a CPA 138 and DIA 140 plan. Every CPA and DIA will have general and technical requirements. So, you know, as Colene kind of noted, the general requirement of CPA 138 is that the TSP will provide a conservation plan with the intent to achieve specific goals and to support organic transition. And there are technical requirements within the plan for different land uses. There are also 5 categories of deliverables that you can see listed here: the cover page, maps, resource inventory and assessment documentation, notes and correspondence, and the practice schedule. And we are going to look at each of these deliverables during this presentation. One exciting thing that we are offering today is a new CPA 138 template. It is optional. Some of our thinking about this is that there has, since CAP 138 changed to CPA 138 and DIA 140 in 2021, I believe there has not been a similar template, and both states and TSPs have asked about the availability of a template that could help structure their work. We didn't want to create a mandatory form that needs to be filled out. We created a Word document that can be customized to the user and the specific situation. It could also be adopted and customized by states if they wanted to adopt the template format and include state resources or highlight the most relevant resource concerns or assessment tools used in the state. So the goal of this style of template was to create a resource to support the planning process and to help clarify expectations while not being overly rigid or making it mandatory. So if you already have a template that's working well for you and includes all the deliverables, you don't have to switch to this template, but it is a resource for those who want to use it. With this template, we wanted to emphasize how CPA 138 follows the steps of conservation planning. Some TSPs for CPA 138 and DIA 140 have a lot of expertise in organic agriculture, but are new to conservation planning. So this is intended to support them in the planning process. And because the template follows the steps of conservation planning, you'll see that it does not exactly follow the order of the CPA 138 document, though the deliverables are all built into the template. One of our next steps is to create an administrative checklist specific to CPA 138 that can be used easily with the template. I am going to attempt to share my screen here, and can folks see the template now?
Yep.
Okay, so if you are an NRCS staff person, we will be able to share a direct link with you to this SharePoint site. If you are a member of the public, then at the moment there will be a public facing link. It's just not quite ready yet, so you can email me directly. We'll be sharing contact information during this presentation. But I wanted to briefly walk through it, and then we'll look at it in more detail throughout the presentation. It notes that it is an optional template, provides a table of contents, a cover page, an opportunity to record the objectives, problems and opportunities, provide narrative information about resource inventory and data analysis, and a table to record how resource concerns were assessed and where there are concerns to note. This is a long table. We'll be talking about that a bit later. There is also a proposed alternatives table, and any of these tables can be, if it makes sense to duplicate them for your needs, they can be used as you see best. And finally, a practice schedule. So throughout this presentation, where you see that CPA 138 template icon, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, that's a snip from the template. We are going to follow our planner and our TSP and our farmer through the steps of conservation planning and walk through the template. I also wanted to mention something very, very important. A big, big thank you to Abby Smith, the state agronomist of Michigan for NRCS, who originally kind of came up with the concept of this template and was creating one for Michigan and shared it with me. And I was like, this is such a great idea, Abby. Can we build off of this to create a national template that could be used? And she, graciously said, of course. So I just want to make sure to give some big props to Abby Smith for how she thought through this process and shared it with us. So we are going to walk through those steps of conservation planning, and we're going to follow our conservation planner, our TSP here with their farmer. I do want to give a few caveats, which is that this is not a technical training on conservation planning, and that I am not a conservation planner, but I am going to use the framework of conservation planning to help clarify the requirements for CPA 138 and share a selection of resources. I also want to note that I'm sharing national resources, and the state that you're working in may have state-specific resources or policies, and I would always defer, to those tools and resources. And one more shout out, these cute little cartoons were shared with me by Maggie Syverson of Iowa, and so I want to just thank her. Let's review where CPA 138 and DIA 140 fit in the conservation planning process. Just another different visual in case that helps to solidify this for folks. CPA 138 is the first 7 steps of the conservation planning process, and DIA 140 is a part of step 8. It's really most focused on design and how to design the use of those practices. There is no current step 9 CEMA, CEMA. I actually maybe someone can throw in the chat what CEMA stands for, but that's the corresponding activity that goes with step 9, and there's no organic specific SEMA. So as we walk through the steps of conservation planning, we're also going to walk through the CPA 138 text. Wherever you see this icon with the CPA 138 text in the left-hand corner, that is a snip from the text. I'm not going to be reading, each snip, but I want everyone to be really grounded in the actual standard, because the template is a resource, but the CPA 138 text is very important for you to review and know very well, because there are a number of details that are in that document that won't necessarily be reflected in this presentation or in every aspect of the template. Starting out the process, there'll be a pre-work meeting between the participant, TSP, and NRCS staff. And that's an opportunity to set expectations for the work to be done, address any questions the producer might have. As with all interactions, the TSP is going to be taking notes on all discussions they have with the producer as they work through the planning activity. Here is the cover page, one of the deliverables from the template. You can see here that the date the pre-work meeting was held and the attendees can be recorded here, along with the other information that's required in the CPA. Another deliverable is notes and correspondence. We talked a little bit about that. This is something that the TSP needs to provide, with notes that document interactions, producer objectives, site visits, as well as information provided to support the participants' understanding of the planned conservation practices, and copies of correspondence like emails. And again, you will get a copy of these slides, and you can read through this in your leisure, as well as links that include the link to the CPA 138 text. If you want to, there are some templates that are publicly available in the field office technical guide of your state. So this is an option for folks who like to use templates, the conservation assistance notes. I'm going to be referencing the field office technical guide, or FOTOG, quite a few times during this presentation. I know some people on this call may be very familiar with that, and others may be hearing this for the first time. So I want to give a brief overview. State FOTOGs are technical guides and primary references for NRCS and TSPs during conservation planning. And each state FOTOG will follow basic guidelines of what goes in the different sections, but will be a bit unique in exactly what is included. So I've included snips from different state FOTOGs in this presentation, and don't be surprised if when you go to your state, it looks a little bit different. I also want to note there's different ways to search in here. If you're wanting to just search for a document name, you may be able to go right to the document search. There is an entire course in AgLearn on the Field Office Technical Guide. So if and when you have access to AgLearn, I would recommend checking out that course. So we have, had our pre-work meeting, you're taking your notes. What comes next in terms of phase 1 of the conservation planning process? This whole phase is focused on collecting and analyzing information. You can see the steps up here. Step 1, identify problems. 2, determine objectives. 3, inventory resources. And 4, analyze resource data. I'm going to walk through these a bit and see how they relate specifically to CPA 138. There may be some pre-planning to begin with as well, reviewing common resource concerns, looking at natural resource data like web soil survey, looking at aerial maps to identify, water sources or other features or features of adjoining properties, things that may impact landscape level natural resources. And here we have our cartoon friends here. They're at a site visit, and they are looking at some, challenges on the farm. I do want to note this is not a photo of an organic farm. This is just a photo that easily demonstrates, a resource concern to look into. And here the farmer and the planner are working together to talk through their observations. So step 1, again, this is a snip from the text. I won't read it verbatim, but give a summary. Step 1 involves visiting with the farmer, identifying and documenting resource concerns and opportunities. And this is rooted in site-specific information. So, there are some examples that could come up for different types of farms, like annual, perennial, and livestock farming systems. During the organic transition, these different types of farms will likely see different challenges. A row crop farm maybe have concerns about erosion potential, maintaining organic matter, managing nutrients. An orchard making the transition to organic might be facing challenges related to, pesticides, biodiversity, pollinator availability, and a dairy farm could be struggling with, manure or pasture management or water quality. The information from that first step feeds into the second step, which is honing in on the specific objectives of the producer, which may need to be revised as you go through the process and learn more. You can see here, perhaps an annual crop farmer is going to be wanting to focus in on weed control as they change their weed control practices, or make sure that they are, maintaining or improving organic matter as required by the organic standards. For a perennial crop, maybe they end up deciding that they really want to focus in on increasing biodiversity and dialing in their pest management plan as they prepare for organic certification and changes to what tools are on the table for them. And for a livestock farmer, especially a dairy farm, as pictured here, they may be focused on how to meet the grazing requirements of the organic standards. So here's the snip from the template where those things from steps 1 and 2 can be documented. Moving into step 3, you can see there is a lot of text here. We are not going to, have time to dive into each one of these items, but generally, in this phase of the process, inventorying resources, you're going to look closely at things like the management happening on the farm, the environmental backdrop like soils, climate, topography, environmentally sensitive areas and neighboring lands, and the existing conditions on the farm. And these items are reflected in the template, but all this, the specific details are in the CPA 138 text. So again, I refer folks to make sure that you spend time with that text and get to know it well. We'll come back to this in a little more detail later. Step 4 is analyzing that resource data. So collected a lot of information about the site-specific management and resources on the farm. And now is the opportunity to use the appropriate natural resource assessment tools to show the current or benchmark conditions. And you'll know, what your assessment shows about natural resource concerns and the need for conservation actions to address those concerns. We won't walk through the details of each assessment tool, but we will talk a little bit more about them and provide more resources later in this presentation. Here in the template, you can see where you would record some of that narrative information that you collected during steps 3 and 4. And here is a resource concern assessment table where you can record which, all of the resource concerns, whether or not there is an issue, how you assessed it, and any details of any issues. And one of the examples that's used here is sheet and rill erosion and classic gully erosion. And we're going to kind of follow along with those throughout the template and during this presentation. And we will look at this in a bit more detail later as well. So you made it through phase 1 of the conservation planning process. And here we are moving into phase 2. This is all about decision support. So in our little cartoon here, you can see the TSP evaluating some of the technical information, thinking about the NRCS practices that can help address resource concerns, while talking through considerations for the farmer, which could be around time, labor, machinery, cost, family, or environmental impacts. At the end of this process, the farmer will make decisions about which alternatives work best for them. So moving to steps 5 and 6, step 5 is about formulating alternatives, or in a more layperson's way of saying it, thinking about changes that could address the natural resource concerns. One alternative is always going to be the no action alternative, which means what's going to happen if no changes are made. And the second is going to be one or more NRCS conservation practices that could improve the natural resources. There could be multiple alternatives for each resource concern that take into account the farmer's specific situation. And in step 6, you will be evaluating those possible alternatives and considering their effects on other natural resources and on the farmer. So you're going to be talking through this with the farmer, as well as reviewing information about the alternatives with the farmer so they can select their preferred alternatives and make decisions. Here is the CPA 138 template proposed alternatives table. You see here, it kind of continues to follow that example of sheet and rill erosion. It provides 2 alternatives. One includes some practices, the other does not. And there is some more information here about the treatment and considerations. This is just an example. There could be any number of practices that would be a best fit for any given farm. So this is just example language. When a resource to be aware of is, again, our friend, the FOTOG. In section 5 of the FOTOG, when you're considering alternatives and possible impacts on natural resources, you may want to look here and familiarize yourself with the Conservation Practice Physical Effects, or CPPE. This is a snip, I believe, from Oregon's FOTOG, and you can see if you go to section 5, you can find the conservation practice physical effects and a number of resources that are listed there. It might look a little bit different in different states. The last step of CPA 138 is to make decisions, and these can be documented with the practice schedule table as well as a conservation plan map. So here is the text above and the template table, practice schedule table below. And here is an example from a plan, the practice schedule on the left and the conservation plan map on the right, showing where those conservation practices are planned spatially on the farm. So as we went through the steps, we did talk about a little bit about all of the deliverables, but I want to take a deeper dive on the maps and the resource inventory and assessment documentation. So as you go through, phase 1 of the planning process, there are various maps that will help inform you and NRCS staff and the client about what's going on their farm. So a soil map is one of the maps that would be included, as well as a field and site features map. When you look at the template, I know it gets a little fuzzy when you do a snip, so apologies for the fuzziness. But you can see there are some of the details that are included in CPA 138 about what needs to be included in the maps. And some more information about CLU data. Common Land Unit data is created and managed by FSA, the Farm Service Agency. Those are those maps where you can see, tract and farm numbers. And they are utilized by NRCS for conservation planning. But TSPs don't have direct access to this data. It is important data to have because some TSP deliverables require documentation of the farm and tract number, and accurate conservation planning would result from a TSP working with these established boundaries, this CLU information. If a TSP needs access, the program participant or farmer can share a hard copy or digital map that the TSP can reference, or they can request and share an exported shapefile or other GIS format, depending on what mapping software you're using. Or if the program participant or farmer has submitted a CPA 70 information release form to NRCS, then NRCS will be able to directly deliver some of these resources to you. So that could be a very valuable form to have if your participant is open to signing that. A little bit deeper dive into this resource inventory and assessment documentation. While I won't be able to go into each of these, I do want to talk a little bit more about 7 and 8. You can see 7 here, calculations from current erosion prediction technology used to estimate the benchmark annual sheet and rill erosion and wind erosion, as well as organic system plan documentation. So that last text came from the deliverables. And this part of the CPA 138 text comes from the technical requirements. It talks about how a TSP, one of the technical requirements is to use NRCS approved technology tools and protocols. So these include tools that measure or model water erosion like Russell 2, wind erosion like WEPS, nitrogen leaching and offsite movement, which could be done within Russell 2 or could be a state-approved tool. Phosphorus assessment would likely be a state-approved tool. And the pesticide screening tool and hazard assessment, this is WinPST. And even though organic producers don't use all of the same pesticides that a non-organic producer would, there are still pesticides in use. And if there are pesticides in use, they do have risks, and so they should be screened using WinPST. So a little activity there. I know there's a lot of acronyms, and for some people, this may be pretty new information. Don't know how good the Q&A box is for this, though, but maybe quiz yourself. And think we're going to be doing some matching. We're going to start with WinPST, and we're going to be thinking about what number photo does WinPST measure. So what resource concern would WinPST be assessing? And that would be pesticides. For nitrogen leaching, it would be photo number 3, WEPS. Wind erosion, you can see kind of that dust blowing around on field number 5, or yeah, picture number 5. Russell 2 is water erosion, and hopefully we don't see fields that look like that, but then it would definitely be a great thing to really focus in on. And the phosphorus index, the phosphorus index is going to be something that you're going to want to look closely at on some organic farms. Excuse me, if they're using, a lot of high phosphorus inputs like manures or compost, then you're going to want to be focusing in on the potential for phosphorus to leave the site. Okay, so looking a little bit closer at the template and the resource concern assessment table, there are 2 different resources that are linked just in the directions in the template. These are the planning criteria and the resource concern fact sheets. And we are going to peek at those. Again, all these links will be in the resource document that's provided at the end of the presentation. But these are a great resource that I don't know how many folks use them, but especially if you're new to the world of NRCS and conservation planning, these include information about every single NRCS resource concern and include what is it, why is it important, what can be done about it, with examples of typical causes and solutions. And the other link goes to the planning criteria. Here again, we see our friend, the photog, and you will find this in section 3 of your state's photog, but it is also linked in the resource document. Now, when using this document, I first of all recommend that if you have access to AgLearn, or when you get access to AgLearn in the future, there is an entire course on using the planning criteria in conservation planning. So just a plug for that course, but we're going to very, very briefly say that, there's some great information in here about what the resource concern is, what you're trying to do, when planning, reduce sheet and rill erosion to tolerable limits. It talks about what the land use is. So if we're evaluating cropland, it tells you what tool you should use for assessment. So here, the current NRCS water erosion technology, that is going to be Russell 2. And we saw that language a little bit earlier in CPA 138 about current technology for erosion, something like that. And sometimes that can be confusing to folks, like what tool is it? In this case, it is Russell 2. Because classic gully erosion is another resource concern that we used in our example language, I wanted to look briefly at this as well. You can see here the land use crop, and the tool is client input and or planner observation. This obviously, client input and planner observation is going to be important for all resource concerns, but it's not always the best assessment tool when you get to this level of the process. For classic gully erosion, however, it is the tool that NRCS recommends using. And here's our table again, our resource concern assessment table. And you can see, sheet and rill erosion was, deemed to be a concern, and the assessment tool used was Russell 2. And for classic gully erosion, it was deemed to be a concern, and that's because the client or the planner, saw gullies in the field. A third example on this chart is the pesticides transported to surface water, and this was deemed, in this example, to not be a concern. I think if you were to look at the planning criteria, if I recall correctly, in that case, there is more than one tool that is available, and as the TSP, you get to select the tool that it makes the most sense. And in this case, it was either evaluation of current pest management system or WinPST. And because no pesticides were in use, they didn't use WinPST. I want to note that this table includes every resource concern. And, there's not a small number of them. I do think it is important to, if you have the opportunity, to check in with your, state agronomist where you're doing planning to see what are the highest priority resource concerns in the state. There are going to be some assessment tools that are going to be used more widely in some areas of the country than others, and some resource concerns that are going to be of greater importance in some areas of the country than others. If you are working in Montana, where it's very arid and there are short growing seasons and long fallow seasons and dry, wind erosion and using WEPs is going to be very important. Whereas there may be some areas of the country where it might not be as widely used, and that could be the case for lots of things. If you're working in Hawaii, that's going to have very special resource concerns that you're going to need to be thinking about in a kind of state specific way. So I always want to note that states may have, state specific tools, and it's important to dig around in the photog, connect with the NRCS planner that you are working with, or other resources that we'll talk about later in this presentation, to make sure that you are able to focus in on what's the most important pieces. This is a national template. It includes everything, and it includes national resources. If you would like some more resources about Russell 2, here we see our friend again, the Field Office Technical Guide, the photog. Not every state is going to have this, and it's going to probably vary on what section it's in. But if you want to try searching Russell in the document search, you may find that your state has some great information on some of these tools. There are also some videos available, publicly available, as well as a webinar about using Russell 2 in organic systems and a guide for using Russell 2 in organic systems. And if you haven't seen a Russell 2 run, here is an example that is publicly available on the internet. From a Carolina Farm Stewards plan. They have TSPs that do conservation planning and are generous enough to show kind of an example plan on their website. Another national level tool that might be of interest to folks is the Infield Soil Health Assessment Guide, or sometimes called the IFSHA. There's a guide that accompanies a worksheet that you can take out on the farm, and it's a great tool for walking through a lot of the soil health resource concerns. And last but not least, the TSP website has a great section where you could explore some of the other tools. I think one of the things that's challenging is, there's a lot of potential tools. Which ones will I need to use? That comes more with experience and with working with the conservation planning criteria and things like that. So it's hard to cover all of the possibilities in any given training. I mentioned I would talk a little bit more about the OSP as well. Colene mentioned earlier that for those of you who planned CAP 138, there was a greater emphasis within CAP 138 on the development of the OSP. It was a big part of the template that was used for CAP 138. And in CPA 138, there is a greater emphasis on conservation planning. Organic system plan documentation is listed under the resource inventory and assessment documentation to be included as applicable. And we'll talk a bit more about what that looks like. For those of you who aren't familiar with what an OSP is, Colene gave a great, primer to it, but it's the primary document that outlines a producer's practices that they'll follow to meet the organic standards. And it is submitted to the organic certifier when they apply for certification. As Colene mentioned, typically farmers will create their OSP during that application process, which would be, in the 2 to 6 months before their first anticipated organic harvest. So they will not have an OSP at the beginning of their transition. It's also important to know that each certifier has their own forms for the OSP, though they all gather similar information. And as of right now, there's no universal OSP. I think a big shift from CAP 138 to CPA 138 is that TSPs are not responsible for developing the OSP with the client, but they may have expertise and choose to support clients with this activity. That's going to be between the TSP and the client, how they want to handle that. And this will be a little bit of a change for folks who did CAP 138. Here's an example of an organic system plan SNP from a certifier. And you can see here that it talks about natural resources and biodiversity conservation. One requirement of the National Organic Standards is that the producer must maintain or improve the natural resources of their organic operation. And this shows how an OSP might also reference back to a conservation plan as part of the producer's approach to maintaining or improving natural resources. OSPs are often, 20 to 30 pages long. The OSP is broader than just the natural resources and conservation sections. It includes information on sanitation, labeling, and storage, things like that don't interact with conservation planning at all. So not all aspects of the OSP are relevant in the CPA 138 planning process. Colene talked earlier about how the Transition to Organic Partnership Program can provide technical assistance for OSP development as well. So just putting that forward again as a resource for organic system plan support. And here is a snip from the template talking about the organic system plan documentation in the attachment list, which I think I maybe didn't show at the end of the template when I scrolled through, but there is a detailed attachment list at the end. It mentions that producers may have a completed OSP or wish to develop their OSP using forms from an organic certifier of their choice. And that though, every certifier form doesn't have the exact same order, the exact same headings, the exact same questions, it gathers the same essential information. So we wanted to note that that is a valid choice for producers to want to use an OSP from a certifier. If they're early on in their process, aren't interested, they're not sure what certifier they may be going with, or they're not positive their timeline for certification, or they're still exploring certification. There are these templates that are available. And so at these links, you can see the specific sections that would be applicable. But again, it's okay if a certifier form doesn't have these exact titles. So we talked a lot about CPA 138, and we are going to touch more briefly on DIA 140, and that's because there can be a lot of overlap between these two practices. So I really want to cover the main differences. One of the most important ones is that DIA 140 represents the design phase of a conservation plan. So the general requirements are to assist the producer to prepare for implementation. And the technical requirements do include doing some assessments, but if these assessments were just done under CPA 138, like Russell 2 or some other tool, the TSP could reference the CPA 138 plan. Of note, as Colene mentioned earlier, a TSP can only plan NRCS practices under DIA 140 that they are certified in. So they can't be certified in an interim practice, or if the farmer decided they want to do nutrient management and they're not certified in nutrient management, they may have to consider subcontracting with another TSP to do that, or some other format, so that they are only planning the DIA, they are only planning the practices that they are certified for. So I want to give you a second to look at the 5 main categories of deliverables for a CPA and a DIA. And I think you'll see a fair bit of overlap. As Colene mentioned, there are a lot of possibilities for how these would be planned, and who would be doing the planning of different pieces of the conservation planning process. So if, as a TSP, you are doing CPA 138 and DIA 140, you are welcome to refer back to the other information that was already provided in a CPA 138. And here, the main thing that stands out as different to me is the design or implementation details. Here's a snip from the DIA 140 text. It talks about how one of the main deliverables is to develop site-specific written instructions for implementing the conservation plans. If you recall back to step 7 of CPA 138, where they made their decisions, that included all the practices they were interested in and the timeline they were looking to implement them. So this would be taking those practices, those CPSs, and looking at the plans and specifications and operations and maintenance sections, and providing detailed written instructions for how to design that practice on their land. It would also include a statement of work documents from the state photog, as well as it could include IR documents. It says they're not required to be used, but they can also be a good resource for delivering site-specific conservation practice instructions. So where do we find these things? In our good friend, section 4 of the state photog. This is Iowa's photog, and I just randomly selected cover crop, as that's one of the alternatives that's being explored. You can see here the CPS, Conservation Practice Standard, Statement of Work, SOW, IR, implementation requirements. And here in Iowa, they use a PO or practice overview and a GD or guidance document. So there may be other resources that will be of value to you in this section. Oops, I don't know what an OTH is, so. But I bet it's interesting, and I would recommend you poke around in your state photog if you haven't, because you're going to find a lot of really great resources. Here is just looking at that conservation practice standard and seeing the sections that you'd be required to provide site-specific written instructions about how to implement the plans and specifications here, and the operation and maintenance. So, you would be writing out these field numbers and acres, plant species, seeding rates, dates, exact procedure, etc. For some folks, you may feel like this is just speaking a different language, and there are a lot of acronyms. NRCS and the National Organic Program, they both love acronyms quite a bit. So I just wanted to do a quick overview. You know, if these are feeling like unfamiliar to you, we are including acronyms in our resource document, and I just wanted to kind of go through here. You know, what's a CPS? Conservation Practice Standard. You know, SOW, Statement of Work. GD, Guidance Document. PO, Practice Overview. I'm not sure that those two are used widely in all states, but you might see it in your state. Implementation Requirements, IR. Conservation Practice Activity. Design and Implementation Activity. Organic System Plan. And last but not least, the Field Office Technical Guide. One other piece of DIA 140 that might look a little different from CPA 138 is some of the supporting documentation. It notes that, you know, as applicable, if conditions warrant, you know, for that specific situation, it may need a little bit more detailed description about the benchmark conditions, past conditions, and other things related to land, you know, adjacent land use, recreation uses, protected species. And it also might ask, and you also may need, depending upon the practices that are being implemented, to go into detail about permits needed or best management practices. So, as we start to wind down, we talked with some TSPs as we prepared for this presentation, and we wanted to share some of the wisdom that they shared with us. One thing that they shared with us was examples of support that they have experienced either in the present or in the past that they really appreciated. So we're going to run through these here. They love getting feedback on their plans. They appreciated receiving support from NRCS state agronomists on technical questions. They were thrilled to be invited to trainings that were relevant to their work that were being held for staff. They appreciated when TSP coordinators sent out information that had been shared with NRCS staff, but would also be pertinent to TSPs. They appreciated TSP listening sessions that were held when folks provided training or troubleshooting on assessment tools. And in the past, there was a TSP network conference that helped them connect with other TSPs. There's also some things that were mentioned as a wish list, and you're going to see some overlap in these two lists because some of these things that folks are wishing for, some states are doing. So feedback from states, training or resources on assessment tools, IT support for assessment tools, invitations to join trainings, having a mentor, having some sort of TSP mentor program was a wish list. Field days, updates to CPA 138 and DIA 140, and TSP involvement in those updates. And some that we're trying to address at least partially today, a new template, a resource list for TSPs. We're providing an incomplete list with resources that are in this presentation. There are so many resources that could be relevant to TSPs, but hopefully this is a good start. And guidance on who to contact with questions in each state. Now, you're probably wondering where you can access the CPA 138 template. We are, as mentioned before, but in case you missed it, NRCS staff have a direct link, and we're working on a direct link for folks who are not NRCS staff. But in the meantime, you can email me directly if you would like a copy of the template. With that, I want to pass it to Mercedes.
Hi everyone, my name is Mercedes and I'm an organic conservation specialist serving the central region. I wanted to introduce the TSP community of practice, which is going to be housed on the Ag Solidarity Network. I'll share that link with everybody, but the ASN in brief is a platform for farmers, ag professionals, and conservationists. And you can join groups, you can ask general questions. It's a place for events and opportunities. There's a lot of great resources on it. We've created a TSP group, which is a private group, but TSPs can join or future TSPs can join, and you can ask questions, post events, and then Marvel Seed, which is the organization that I'm a part of, will monitor the group and encourage resource sharing by everybody. It's a really great resource, and the more engagement that happens, then the more valuable it can be. It's already populated with some resources, so feel free to go and check it out and create your member profile. Once you're on the ASN, you can search the groups for the TSP group and then request to join. We will be accepting requests as they come in, but I hope everybody joins and look forward to engaging with you all there.
Yeah, thank you, Mercedes. I know I'm excited about this new resource. You know, it sounds like it fills a gap for TSPs that are looking to connect with others who are doing the same work. And I'm excited to see how it develops. And it seems like a great support for some of those wish list items as well. We're going to run through just a few more resources. This one is a general resource that I think was fairly newly developed and released by the TSP branch, where it walks through the roles and responsibilities for program participant, TSP, and NRCS staff person. So just a great general resource to check out if you haven't seen it. Because as mentioned earlier, we're all really working together to serve organic growers, and there are going to be times to coordinate and collaborate throughout the process, the conservation planning process. Different steps may be done by NRCS staff versus technical service providers. It's really going to depend on the situation for that specific grower in that specific state. Now, if you are working on a contract, your NRCS field office is going to be, of course, a primary resource for you. But we wanted to share some other resources that you might want to know about and what types of questions they can help you out with. So the state agronomist in whatever state you're planning is a resource for technical questions that are related to agronomy and conservation planning or state-specific resources. And they oversee all of the conservation practices that are in the agronomy discipline at the state level. So things like cover crop or conservation crop rotation or things like that, that you may be likely to consider in your plans. Some states also have an organic specific point of contact, so you may be directed to that person. State TSP coordinators are going to be resources. They are going to have information about TSP state level criteria, contact information for state level discipline leads, and regional TSP coordinators are going to be your go-to folks for, you know, everything related to login.gov, e-auth access, the NRCS registry, AgLearn, national TSP criteria, and other things listed in this table. And then organic specialists like myself and Colene and Elise, and you'll see the full list in a few slides, are resources for information about organic requirements, resources, farming practices. We also provide working effectively with organic producers courses, which we'll talk a bit about in a moment, which you may be interested in joining. Here is where you can find those contacts. So the contact information for the state agronomist is going to be on the state office webpage. Regional TSP coordinators can connect you to the state TSP coordinator. And for regional TSP coordinators and organic specialists, you'll see our contact information soon. Here is the contact information for the TSP coordinators by region. So you can see Stacy Bradshaw for the West and Southeast region, Miguel Oliveras for the Central region, and Peter Hoagland in the Northeast. A little bit more about that Working Effectively with Organic Producers course. This, if you are registering as a TSP through the NRCS registry, this is one of the required courses to certify as a TSP for these activities. It is listed in AgLearn, but it can be accessed even if you do not have an AgLearn account. So you can reach out to your TSP regional coordinator or to organic specialists if you want to get connected to join those courses. And here is the contact information for the organic specialists. You can see Colene and Elise in the east, myself and Mercedes in the central region, and Christina Peterson and Katrina Hunter in the west. So we also asked these TSPs that we talked to if they had any advice for, new TSPs coming into things for the first time. And these were some of the things that they shared. Remember your audience. They felt like you don't want the farmer to look like this picture when they see your plan. Is what you developed useful and clear for them? Does it help them meet their goals? And it also still needs to translate to NRCS needs. So you have to think about the audience of the farmer and the need to meet, NRCS requirements. If you haven't already, connect with a current TSP. Some folks are working together with other TSPs. Maybe they work with other folks who are doing conservation planning at an organization, and that's a great resource. But we have this new resource as well, the Marbleseed TSP Community of Practice, and there could be other ways to connect with TSPs through listening sessions or other organizations like the TSP network. And lastly, they said stick with it. There's a lot to learn and a big learning curve, and it takes time to master the various tools and processes. Some key takeaways from our presentation today are that CPA 138 and DIA 140 are components of a conservation plan. So it's really focused on conservation planning and supporting the organic transition. TSPs may be able to offer lots of organic expertise during the conservation planning process, and not all NRCS staff are going to have a lot of exposure to organic, so this is a great resource for growers. There's a new template that is available. Soon we will have a public-facing link, but you can still access it through, feel free to email me. There are many resources that can help you. These include people, these include documents. We're going to be providing a resource list of all of the links, contact information, and acronyms used in this presentation today. And we would love to hear from you. We would love to reach out with ideas for future trainings. And I'll also add, we would love to hear from you if you trial this template and if you have feedback on it. This is a new resource, and we would love to hear how you might change it for your own use, which parts are working really well for you, which parts you have questions about, things like that, and where you see a need for further training. So with that, this is the USDA non-discrimination statement.
Thank you all so much for being here with us today, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Take care.